The Lincoln County War was a conflict that shook the 19th century New Mexico territory and became a defining moment in the state's history. At the heart of this bloody feud were two rival cattle barons, Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, who owned the store in Lincoln County, the Murphys and the Dolan Mercantile and Banking. In the early 1870s, Lincoln County was the largest county in the nation, covering a fifth of New Mexico's territory. With Murphy and Dolan Mercantile and Banking monopolizing trade in the county, controlling prices, and virtually having a hand in nearly every part of the economy, the merchants and their allies, including local law enforcement, were known as the House. Pretty cool name. The merchants had influential territorial ties to officials in Santa Fe and secured several lucrative contracts with the military at Fort Stanton. However, for small farmers and ranchers in Lincoln County, the merchants and their allies were a hated presence, forcing them to pay high costs for their goods while accepting low prices for their cattle. The arrival of John Riley into Murphy and Dolan Mercantile and Banking business changed the dynamic of the county. Soon, another man named John Tunstall entered the picture, setting up a rival business called H. Tunstall and Company. Tunstall, a wealthy 24-year-old English cattleman and banker, had the backing of a large ranch owner named John Chisholm, who owned more than 100,000 head of cattle. The Tunstall-McSween faction became a thorn in Murphy and Dolan's side, and they were not afraid to use their considerable wealth and power to rid themselves of their rivals. In February of 1878, the House obtained a court order to seize some of Tunstall's horses as payment for an outstanding debt. When Tunstall refused to surrender the horses, Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady formed a posse led by Deputy William Morton to seize them. After protesting the presence of the posse on his land, Tunstall was shot in the head on February 18th of 1878. This incident started what became known as the Lincoln County War. The murder of John Tunstall was a turning point in the conflict. The most famous outlaw of all, Billy the Kid, who had been recruited by Tunstall as a cattle guard, was deeply affected by the murder, claiming that Tunstall was one of the only men who treated him like he was a free-born white. That's his quote, not mine. After Tunstall's funeral, Billy swore, "I'll get every son of a bitch who helped kill John if it's the last thing I do," end quote. Adding fuel to the fire, it was rumored that Tunstall had been murdered on the orders of James Dolan and Lawrence Murphy. Adding fuel to the fire, it was rumored that Tunstall had been murdered on the orders of James Dolan and Lawrence Murphy. However, Billy would not be able to immediately exact his revenge. Along with Fred Waite, he was briefly jailed by Sheriff William Brady. After his release, Billy soon joined a posse led by Dick Brewer, Tunstall's ranch foreman, called the Famous Regulators. The group's primary aim was to hunt for Tunstall's killer, William Morton. The Regulators were a small, tight-knit group of men who were determined to avenge the death of John Tunstall and bring his killers to justice. In addition to the famous Billy the Kid and Dick Brewer, the group included men such as Josiah Doc Scurlock, Charlie Baudry, and Tom O'Fold, all who had been friends and associates of Tunstall. Regulators were a force to be reckoned with, and they soon began striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. They were skilled gunmen and horsemen, and they were relentless in their pursuit of justice. They rode across the county, tracking down members of the posse that had killed Tunstall and leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. On March 9th of 1878, in the foothills of Captain, along the murky Blackwater Creek, a heinous massacre took place. The Regulators, on the third day back of their journey to Lincoln, claimed that they were forced to kill 3 men named McCluskey, Morton, and Baker. The Regulators alleged that Morton murdered McCluskey and attempted to escape with Baker, which led to their fatal end. However, their story was met with skepticism, as Morton was believed to be a close friend of the group, and it seemed improbable that he would turn on them. The gruesome discovery of 11 bullet holes in Morton's body and 11 bullet holes in Baker's body only served to fuel the doubts that the Regulators' accounts were false. It is wildly believed that the Regulators were seeking to silence their opponents and murder the trio in cold blood. The violence continued to escalate in Lincoln County. Sheriff Brady, alarmed by the regulators' continued actions, sought assistance from the Territorial Attorney General, Thomas Cantron. Cantron sent the issue right on up to the Territorial Governor, a man named Samuel B. Axtell. The governor decreed that the regulators' actions were illegal and that only served to intensify the already tense situation. With a man named Windman having his status of Deputy U.S. Marshal revoked, Sheriff Brady and his men became the sole law enforcement officers of all of Lincoln County. It's a huge county, the biggest at the time of the whole country. On April 1st of 1878, the regulators, consisting of French, McNabb, Middleton, Waite, Brown, and Billy the Kid, gathered behind Tunstall's store, preparing to launch a vicious attack on Brady and his deputies. As chaos ensued on the main street of Lincoln, Brady was shot numerous times and met his end. Deputy George W. Hindman was also fatally shot. French and McCarty broke cover and raced to Brady's lifeless body, maybe to obtain the arrest warrant they had for McSween, or to retrieve McCarty's rifle, which had been confiscated during a previous arrest. However, a surviving deputy, a man named Billy Matthews, managed to wound both of them with one bullet that passed through both men. French's injury was so severe that he had to seek shelter. Windman's role in the incident remained unclear because he said he was feeding Tunstall's dog at the time. At Blazer's Mill, a sprawling complex owned by a dentist and complete with a post office, general store, and multiple adobe structures, the regulators had gathered to feast at Mrs. Godfrey's restaurant just 3 days after their latest kill, Sheriff Brady and Deputy Hinman. Unbeknownst to them, a man named Buckshot Roberts, a rancher trying to stay out of the ongoing war, had come to collect his check and was shocked to see the regulators dining nearby. Despite Frank Coe's attempts to convince him to surrender, Roberts refused, fearing for his life. Brewer, growing impatient, orders some of his men to take Roberts into custody, but the old gunman fired his Winchester and wounded several of the regulators, including John Middleton and George Coe. In the ensuing chaos, Buckshot Roberts retreated to a nearby building and barricaded himself in with his .50-70 government Springfield rifle, which he had acquired from Dr. Blazer himself, Blazer's Mill. The regulators, shaken by the turn of events and their wounded comrades, tried unsuccessfully to get Roberts to come out. Brewer circled around the building and opened fire on the fortified adversary, but Buckshot Roberts fired back and struck him in the eye. This ultimately killed Roberts the next day, and he and Brewer were actually buried side by side near the big house where the fateful gunfight took place. The violence of Lincoln County War had reached a fevered pitch, and there was no end in sight. After Brewer's death, the regulators were thrown into kind of some disarray until they elected McNabb as their new captain. Unfortunately for McNabb, his reign was short-lived. On April 29th of 1878, a posse led by Sheriff Pepin and made up by notorious Jesse Evans' gang and the Seven River Warriors engaged in a fierce shootout with McNabb and two other regulators, Saunders and Frank Coe, at Fitz Ranch. The air was filled with sounds of gunfire as the two exchanged shots, but in the end, McNabb fell dead while Saunders was badly wounded and Coe was captured. The aftermath of McNabb's death was chaotic. The next day, 4 members of the Seven Rivers posse were found dead in Lincoln. Though the regulators were blamed, no one could prove their guilt. Meanwhile, Frank Coe escaped from custody with the alleged help of Deputy Sheriff Wallace Ollinger, who reportedly gave him a pistol. The ironclad regulators then assumed defensive positions in the town of Lincoln, trading shots with Dolan men and even members of the U.S. Army cavalry. In the chaos, a Dolan man named Dutch Charlie was wounded by George Coe's rifle fire with reckless actions. The regulators had earned themselves a set of new enemies. But the regulators refused to back down. They continued their mission to bring justice to those who wronged them. The tensions between the two sides reached a boiling point on July 15th of 1878, when the regulators found themselves surrounded in Lincoln by the Dolan Murphy Seven River Cowboys. The regulators were holed up in 2 different positions, the McSween house and the Ellis store. The two sides exchanged gunfire for 3 long days, during which time a defender of the McSween house, Tom McCullens, was killed by a stray bullet. The regulators were determined to hold their ground, and some even left their positions to chase Dolan men into an outhouse with rifle fire. The regulators' luck finally ran out when U.S. Army troops arrived, pointing literal cannons at the Ellis store in their position. Billy the Kid and Doc Scurlock and their men fled from their positions, leaving those in the McSween house to their fate. The Dolan men set the house ablaze on July 19th, and the flames quickly engulfed the building. Susan McSween and the other women and children were given safe passage out, but the men inside continued to fight the fire. The tension escalated, and a close-quarters gunfight erupted, leading to the deaths of Alexander McSween, Bob Beckwith, and Harvey Morris, McSween's law partner. In the confusion, 3 Mexican regulators managed to escape to rendezvous with the ironclad members. The Battle of Lincoln had become with a devastating end, with the regulators left to mourn their losses and the Dolan faction declaring victory. The Lincoln County War may have officially ended, but its bitter legacy continues to simmer in the hearts and minds of those who survived it. Billy the Kid, the most famous regulator and most famous outlaw, I would say, of all time, became a fugitive and fled with his remaining comrades, including Bowdry, O'Fold, and Dave Rudabaugh. They embarked on a life of crime, rustling cattle, and committing other felonies as they evaded law. As most of us know, Pat Garrett, the sheriff, tracked them down and ended up killing Billy the Kid at Fort Sumner in New Mexico. And the death of Billy the Kid really marked the end of an era, and a brutal reminder that there is still violence after the Lincoln County War. Even though the Lincoln County War ended and regulators were killed off and outlaws were also killed, there was some legislation passed because of how brutal this war was. President Hayes signed the Posse Comitatus Act into law, which would have prohibited the use of federal troops for domestic law enforcement. But Hayes invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807, allowing federal troops to intervene. However, the war achieved little beyond sowing seeds of distrust and hostility amongst the locals. The death of Murphy from cancer brought some closure to the conflict, but did little to heal the wounds. Susan McSween, Tunstall's widow, hired an attorney to pursue charges against Dolan and the others. She also worked toward amnesty for the regulators. On the first anniversary of Tunstall's murder, Billy Campbell and Evans killed her attorney, Huston Chapman, and fled the territory. Dolan, who was allegedly involved in the murder, was indicted but later acquitted. Dolan eventually acquired all of Tunstall's property and lived on his ranch until his death in 1898. On the other hand, Susan McSween, who inherited land after the war, established a ranch in Three Rivers, New Mexico, and became a prominent cattle rancher. Her holdings grew to some of the largest in the territory, averaging between 3,000 and 5,000 head of cattle. She died a very wealthy woman in 1931 at the age of 85, and her legacy is a reminder of the turbulent times of the Lincoln County War. The legacy of this war lives on today. Many historians consider this to be one of the defining conflicts of the American Wild West. It was a time of lawlessness and violence, a time when men were killing to risk everything for honor and revenge. And although the war itself was brief, its impact was felt throughout the regions for years to come. On a fateful Thursday, April 14th of 1881, a mere 3 days into his new role as town marshal, Dallas Stoudemire found himself catapulted into the annals of Old West history. The infamous 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight would etch its name into the minds of people across the country, from the bustling streets of San Francisco to the towering buildings of New York City. News of the confrontation spread like wildfire through the pages of the newspapers, captivating by tales of lawlessness and vengeance. The saga unfolded a mile south of El Paso, Texas, where the mighty Rio Grande cut a winding path, marking the divide between the United States and Mexico. The air cracked with tension as a thundering herd of roughly 75 Mexican cowboys, armed to the teeth, thundered into the town. Their mission was very clear: to locate 2 missing compatriots, 2 men named Sanchez and Juarez. Stolen cattle had crossed the river into the hands of ruthless thieves. Hired by a wealthy Mexican landowner, this armed posse was determined to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. El Paso County Constable Gus Crimcaw, fluent in Spanish, was sought out to aid in the search. Driven by a sense of duty, Crimcaw agreed to lead the posse, venturing into the unknown. Their quest led them to the doorstep of a man named Johnny Hale, a ranch owner whose shadowy reputation as a cattle rustler whispered through the winds. The discovery of the lifeless bodies of two missing Mexicans near Hale's ranch sent shockwaves through the community, igniting a furious blaze of resentment and a thirst for justice. El Paso stood on the precipice, its streets teeming with a swelling crowd that included Johnny Hale, the accused cattle rustler, and his comrade, former town marshal, a man named George Campbell. Animosity and unease permeated the air as the American watched warily, fearing the explosive combination of armed Mexicans consumed by grief and anger demanded justice within the confines of their city. The stage was set for inquest, held in the solemn halls of justice. Constable Crimcaw, his voice a bridge between languages and cultures, stood as the interpreter, his role crucial in the quest for truth. The verdict reverberated through the chamber. The young Mexican cowboys, Sanchez and Juarez, had been innocent victims drawn into treacherous web of stolen cattle. Their killers, the American cattle rustlers Peveler and Stevenson, had boasted callously about their deeds, their words damning them in the eyes of justice. Formal charges were swiftly laid upon the accused, and they were taken into custody, awaiting their day in court. The tensions eased as the crowd dispersed, their thirst for retribution momentarily satiated. The armed Mexicans, their grief palpable, embarked on a sorrowful journey back to their homeland, carrying the lifeless bodies of their fallen comrades, ready to offer them a final resting place. But this tale does not end here. One of the most famous gunslingers of the Wild West, Marshal Dallas Stoudemire, was in the courtroom that day. He was actually appointed as town marshal 3 days earlier before this trial began, and he was the one thrown into the mix of this. With the court adjourned, Stoudemire's thoughts turned to dinner, and he made his way across the street to a place called the Globe Restaurant, seeking a moment of respite amidst the chaos of the day, but fate had other plans in store for Dallas Stoudemire. In a nearby saloon, Constable Crimcaw went in search of his rifle and pistol, unaware that a storm was brewing within the dimly lit confines of the establishment. A confrontation erupted between Crimcaw and George Campbell, ignited by remarks that Campbell was alleged to have made about Crimcaw's translations and his supposed friendship with the Mexicans. Remember, Crimcaw was leading the search, he was the translator, and now Americans are being arrested because of this, and people were mad about it. As tensions reached its peak, John Hale, heavily intoxicated and seething with anger over Crimcaw's involvement in the matter, seized the opportunity to make his mark. In a sudden chaotic burst movement, he grabbed one of Campbell's pistols and bellowed, "George, I've got you covered." The gunshots echoed through the saloon, and Crimcaw reeled backwards, seeking support against a nearby saloon door. His hand instinctively reached for his own pistol, ready to defend himself. The thunderous sound of gunshots reached Marshal Dallas Stoudemire's ears, jolting him from his diner chair. Without hesitation, he leaped into action, pulling his own pistols out as he sprinted into the streets, his heart pounding with adrenaline. But in a frenzy of movement, chaos reigned, and the line between friend and foe was blurred. Wildly firing his dual .44 caliber Smith & Wessons, Stoudemire's bullets found an unintended target, striking an innocent Mexican bystander who was running for cover. The tragic scene unfolded in a mere seconds as John Hale sought refuge behind an adobe pillar, peering out cautiously. But Stoudemire's focus was unyielding, and with deadly precision he took aim at Hale. A single shot pierced the air, finding its mark between Hale's eyes, ending his life instantly. The streets were stained with the blood of those whose path had crossed on this fateful day. Meanwhile, Campbell emerged from cover, pistol drawn, but seeing the lifeless body of Hale laying on the ground, he shouted at Stoudemire that this was not his fight. Yet, amidst the chaos, Krimkaw, grappling with like a mix of pain and confusion, mistakenly believed that Campbell was responsible for his own wounds, and without hesitation he fired at Campbell and shot him with pretty devastating accuracy. The first bullet shattered Campbell's gun and broke his right wrist, causing him to drop his weapon. But in a bid of survival, Campbell scooped up his fallen pistol with his left hand, with his body pretty much racked in pain. Stoudemire, now not tangled up with the deadly dance with Hale, whirled backwards towards Campbell and unleashed another shot, hitting him in the foot. The agony was unbearable, and Campbell clutched his stomach, collapsing to the ground. With chilling composure, Stoudemire walked slowly towards Campbell, his eyes locked on his fallen adversary. In the midst of the agony, Campbell's voice erupted with fury, accusing Stoudemire of murder. But the marshal remained silent, and his resolve was unwavering. In the matter of just a few seconds, 4 men lay dead or dying. Their lives are intertwined in violence and vengeance. The streets were stained with the consequences of their action, and a silence fell over the scene. 3 Texas Rangers stood nearby, witnessing the carnage, but kind of remained aloof, convinced that Stoudemire had the situation well under hand. He was the deputy marshal of El Paso. The echoes of the gunfight would resonate through the town for years to come, forever altering the course of history in El Paso. In the aftermath of the deadly counter, Stoudemire's legend would grow, shrouded in both awe and fear, as the cost of justice and revenge played out in the untamed landscape of the Old West. The story kind of keeps going, even though the 4 Dead in 5 Seconds is the main topic of this video, but I want to give y'all some background or some continued story, because the story it keeps going, unfortunately for all parties involved. So 3 days after the gunfight that left 4 men dead in a blink of an eye, a web of vendettas began to spin. James Manning, fueled by deep hatred and burning desire for revenge, sought to settle the score. He approached former Deputy Marshal Bill Johnson, a man seething with rage from public humiliation and with a twisted plan in mind: convince him to assassinate Dallas Stoudemire. The night was heavy with darkness as Johnson, the former deputy, lawman of the Wild West, drowned in alcohol, concealing himself behind a massive pillar of bricks, clutching a loaded double-barrel shotgun. The voices of Dallas Stoudemire and his brother-in-law, Stanley Doc Cummings, reached his ears, and his hands trembled with fear and fury. In a tragic twist of fate, Johnson, drunk-ass Johnson, lost his balance and fell backwards, accidentally firing both barrels into the air. Swift as lightning, Dallas Stoudemire responded, unleashing a barrage of bullets that severed Johnson's testicles. The retribution was swift, and Johnson's life slipped away in a matter of minutes. Thus began a feud that would haunt El Paso for days to come. Stoudemire, newly minted as a town marshal, found himself entangled in deadly encounters. 4 men lay dead. 1 life ended unintentionally in the span of 6 days since he assumed his role. Remember, 6 days since he assumed his role as Deputy Marshal of El Paso. Yet amidst the violence, the city's crime rate plummeted, and Stoudemire's reputation as a lawman and skilled gunman soared to greater heights. This feud was far from over, and the Mannings, careful to avoid confronting Stoudemire alone, remained a constant threat. The marshal actually taunted them, daring them to face him in the streets, but they knew all too well the danger of a duel with such a formidable gunslinger. On a day marked by supposed reconciliation, a peace treaty turned deadly in a local saloon. Words flew like bullets, and in the heat of a moment, shots were fired. Stoudemire's friend tried to intervene, but the balance was upset, and Doc Manning's bullet struck Stoudemire's left arm. The marshal fell, barely protected by paper folded in his shirt, as James Manning delivered the fatal blow. As the dust settled and the echoes of the gunfire subsided, Dallas Stoudemire, the once legendary gunfighter, lay lifeless on the ground. A frenzied scene unfolded, with Doc Manning unleashing his rage onto the fallen man's lifeless body. The feud had claimed another life, leaving behind a trail of vengeance and sorrow. The mournful toll of funeral bells resonated through El Paso as Stoudemire's life was honored in a solemn ceremony. His wife, Isabella, paid her final respects before the body was sent to rest at Allington Cemetery, far from the volatile town where the legend was born. But even in death, Stoudemire's presence lingered, haunting the streets that once feared him. The Manning brothers faced trial for his murder, but the jury, filled with their own friends, acquitted them, allowing them to continue to live their lives in El Paso, seemingly unaffected by the echoes of gunshots from days gone by. Ellen Liddy Watson, known as Cattle Kate, was an extraordinary woman whose life unfolded against the backdrop of the untamed Old West. Born in July of 1860, her story is one of resilience, tragedy, and a relentless fight for justice. As the daughter of Thomas Lewis Watson and Frances Close, she grew up in Grey County, Ontario, where her family faced the challenges of a rugged existence. Ellen was the eldest of 10 siblings, and from an early age, she shouldered responsibilities both at home and at school. In 1877, the Watson family embarked on a new chapter, leaving their familiar surroundings behind and settling in Lebanon, Kansas. It was there that Ellen's path diverged from her family when she ventured to Smith Center to work as a cook and housekeeper for H.R. Stone. It was in the Smith Center that Ellen's life took a dramatic turn. She encountered William A. Pickle, a farm laborer, and against her better judgment, she married him on November 24th of 1879. The wedding portrait that survives captured Ellen's towering presence, a tall, square-faced woman standing about 5 foot 8 inches, weighing approximately 165 pounds. Her striking appearance, with brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and a hint of her Scottish heritage in her accent, painted a picture of strength and determination. Unfortunately, Ellen's marriage to Pickle quickly turned into a nightmare. He subjected her to verbal and physical abuse, often lashing out with a horsewhip. In January of 1883, Ellen fled from her tormentor and sought refuge at her parents' home. Pickle pursued her, but was ultimately scared off by her father, ensuring that they would never cross paths again. Ellen made her way to Red Cloud, Nebraska, just 12 miles from her family's homestead, where she found solace and worked at the Royal Hotel. It was during this time that she established her residency and filed for divorce, seeking liberation from the shackles of an abusive relationship. Against her family's wishes, Ellen ventured to Denver, Colorado to join her brother, who had settled there. From Denver, she embarked on a solitary journey that led her to the rugged lands of Cheyenne, Wyoming. In a time when independent women were a rarity, Ellen defied the convention and sought work as a seamstress and cook. Although Cheyenne didn't capture Ellen's heart, fate intervened in late 1885 or early 1886 when she followed the railroads to Rawlins, Wyoming. It was there, amidst the vast expanse of frontier, that Ellen found herself working as a cook and waitress in the prestigious Rawlins House, the premier boarding house in town. On a cold winter's day of February 24th in 1886, the small towns of Rawlins buzzed with the sound of clinking spurs and lively chatter. Among the rugged cowboys and weary travelers, a fateful encounter took place that would change the course of Ellen Watson's life forever. James Jim Averill, a man with a rugged demeanor and adventurous spirit, arrived in Rawlins, his eyes set on claiming a piece of untamed land along the enchanting Sweetwater River. Averill wasted no time in establishing his presence, opening a rustic restaurant and a humble general store that beckoned to cowboys and wanderers embarking on the treacherous trails leading westward. It didn't take long for the aroma of sizzling steaks and fresh brewed coffee to lure Ellen Watson, a woman of remarkable culinary talent, into Averill's bustling eatery. Mesmerized by tantalizing flavors and the vibrant atmosphere, Watson's heart quickened with the possibilities that lay before her. Averill, recognizing her exceptional skill, wasted no time in extending an offer to the talented cook to join his establishment. Watson, yearning for independence and seeking an escape from the mundane, readily accepted. As the days grew warmer and the promise of spring filled the air, the couple's relationship blossomed. In May, a bold decision was made as Watson and Averill embarked on a journey traversing the rugged terrain for 100 miles in search of a marriage license. The dusty town of Lander, Wyoming became a fleeting sanctuary of hope and anticipation as their paperwork was processed. The marriage license, bearing the name Ellen Liddy Andrews, served as a whisper of commitment, although it legally remained uncertain. Legends and tales have been woven around their union, shrouding their bond in a veil of secrecy. With their unspoken marriage, Watson discovered a newfound opportunity, a key to unlock her dreams. The Homestead Act of 1862 beckoned to her, tantalizing her with the prospect of owning 160 acres of land, providing that she made it her own within 5 years. It was a chance, but one that eluded married women. Thus, the secret union with Averill ensured that Watson's eligibility to claim the land that awaited for her was just beyond the reach of Oregon, Mormon, and California trails. In the sweltering heat of August of 1886, Watson's determined spirit materialized as she filed squatters' rights to the land adjacent to Averill's. The vast expanse of untouched wilderness lay before her, a blank canvas awaiting her touch. But it was May of 1888 that Watson seized her destiny with unwavering resolve, formally filing her homestead claim to the coveted piece of land. To satisfy the demands of the Homestead Act, a modest yet sturdy cabin emerged, standing as a testament to her tenacity, while a sturdy corral welcomed the prospect of livestock. With her hard-earned savings, Ellen Watson embarked on a daring endeavor that would shape her future. Immigrants trudging along the treacherous trails, weary from their journey, became her gateway to a burgeoning cattle enterprise. She carefully negotiated deals, acquiring cattle from these weary travelers, establishing the foundations of her ambitions. However, her 60-acre fenced land, adorned with barbed wire, proved insufficient to sustain her modest herd. In the vast expanse of the American West, ranchers roamed and cattle grazed freely on public land, so Watson was faced with a daunting challenge. In the year of 1872, a powerful alliance was born. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association, or WSGA, emerged, a formidable force forged by 24 influential cattlemen with vast ranches. Their collective aim was to safeguard their rights to the open range, ensuring that cattle thrived under the expansive skies. The harsh snow winter of 1880 and 1881 dealt a devastating blow to these ranchers, burying their livestock under towering snowdrifts. It was in the wake of this catastrophe that ranchers, including Watson, sought alternatives to sustain their cattle through the harsh winter months. The cultivation of hay became their lifestyle, demanding access to water for its successful growth, a vital resource that now held the key to the survival. Nestled amidst the enchanting landscape claimed by Watson and Averill, a shimmering ribbon of life flowed. Horse Creek, a precious mile of rippling water that coursed through their domain. It promised sustenance and prosperity, an invaluable asset in the realm of ranching. But the allure of the open range came with its own set of challenges, cloaked in laws and regulation that dictated the fate of those who dared to defy its boundaries. In a realm of unbranded calves became the property of WSGA, Watson found herself ensnared in the clutches of this powerful association. The cattleman's iron grip tightened its hold, systematically marginalizing smaller ranches through restrictive auction practices and the demand for registered brands. The crazy cost of branding and gatekeeping of exclusivity locked away the dreams and aspirations of ranchers. The fate of brands lay in the hands of a committee swayed by the whims and biases of the Cattlemen's Association, effectively silencing the voices of those who dared to challenge the status quo. Watson and Averill persisted in their pursuit. They faced repeated rejection as they filed brand application, each denial a blow to their hopes and aspirations. Yet, within the obstacles, a silver opportunity emerged. In a twist of fate, Watson acquired a previously registered LU, its altered pronunciation, a whispered tribute to her own name, Ella. With the ebbs and flows of triumph and setbacks, a man named Albert John Boothwell cast his eyes upon Watson and Averill's land. As the embodiment of wealth and power, Boothwell, despite his claim to land beyond his own property, repeatedly sought to seduce them with huge offers. Yet, they weren't deterred by the riches that Boothwell was throwing their way. The couple clung to their dreams, refusing to yield the hard-won domain to the temptations that swirled around them. Empowered by her newfound brand, Watson embarked on a pivotal moment of her journey. In July of 1889, as her witness, the branding iron seared the flesh of her cattle, making them her own. 41 cattle, bearing the scars of her ownership, became the testament to her resilience, a symbol of her perseverance amidst the adversity she had faced. It was in pursuit of securing her livelihood that Watson, perhaps unknowingly, stepped on the toes of fate. Filed for approval to construct a water ditch, a conduit that would breathe life into her parched lands. Little did she know that her actions would ignite a powder keg of retaliation and retribution. Again, Albert John Boothwell, the jealous neighbor, a man whose own grasp of legal and land ownership was tenuous at best, saw Watson's audacious move as a direct challenge to his dominion. Defying the law himself by fencing off public land, he retaliated by encroaching upon Ella's cherished domain. His cowboys dispatched as agents of torment and harassment. Oblivious to the peril that lurked on the horizon, Watson and Averill remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their midst. On July 20th, 1889, a day etched in infamy for this area, it would witness the darkest chapters of their life. A nefarious plot was set in motion, orchestrated by their neighbor Boothwell and a handful of ranchers whom he had coerced into his sinister web. In an act of shocking betrayal, they descended on the couple's homestead, their intentions veiled with a veneer of authority. At gunpoint, they forced Ella onto a buckboard, her life hanging on by a thread, as she was falsely accused of cattle rustling. Rawlins, a town that had witnessed ebbs and flows of hopes and dreams, became the stage of an unspeakable act of violence. Gene Crowder, a witness to the unfolding tragedy, rode for help, racing against time to alert their friend, Frank Buchanan, of the impending horror. Gunshots punctured the air, the defiant outcry of Buchanan's resistance, yet it was futile struggle against the overwhelming tide of darkness. Both Jim and Ella, their spirits unbroken but their bodies shackled by an inescapable grip of fate, were callously hanged by the hands of those who once shared the vast expanse of the open range with them. In the aftermath of these heinous acts, the anguish reverberated through the hearts of those who told the tale of Ella Watson's tragic demise. Her spirit forever entwined in the untamed landscape she had sought to conquer, serving a stark reminder of the perils that befell the daring souls who challenged the established order. County Sheriff Frank Hadsell was determined to bring justice to the innocent victims. Accompanied by Deputy Sheriff Phil Watson, a man unrelated to Ella but still wanted to bring justice to innocent people, both apprehended Albert Boothwell, the crazy neighbor, and his cohorts, 5 men stained with the blood of the innocent. People were hopeful that a trial would bring them to justice, but there was a weird feeling in the wind. Gene Crowder, the key witness and the man who rode for help during the hanging, just vanished. Same thing with a man named John DeCory. He was a crucial figure to the trial and he just disappeared. Frank Buchanan, the man who Gene Crowder rode for help, also just disappeared. The papers didn't know, the town didn't know, just whispers. Albert Boothwell, the orchestrator of the heinous acts that stained the soil of Rawlins, Wyoming, seemed to evade the clutches of justice. He claimed dominion over the homesteads of the victims and kind of usurped their legacy without facing any legal consequences that should have rightfully hit him. Albert Boothwell's audacity led him to running his ranch unscathed, and his actions are a grim reminder of the imbalance of power that reigned in those lawless territories. It was only with this eventual retirement to Los Angeles, where he died in the 1920s, that the shadow finally lifted. Amidst the aftermath of the tragedy and the chilling silence that settled over land, a different narrative began to emerge. A twist of fate intended to justify the brutality inflicted upon Ella and Avril unfolded within the pages of the Cheyenne Daily Sun and other publications controlled by the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. The myth of Cattle Kate Maxwell, a prostitute and cattle rustler, was born from the ink that stained those papers. Editor Ed Taus, with his 1,300-word article, wove a tale that justified the grisly act of lynching and glorified the violence perpetrated by the cattlemen. The press became their tool, painting a distorted image of the victims as the cattlemen revealed the public condemnation of those they deemed thieves as well. It was a dance of power, a narrative that would be resurrected years later during the violent clashes in 1891 and 1892. Yet, amidst the darkness, voices of truth did emerge, testaments to the character of Ella Watson. Harry Ward, a stage station operator who knew her well, described her as a woman of remarkable presence, possessing a beauty that transcended the surface. He spoke of her with compassion, her generous spirit that extended to those in need, refusing to let anyone go hungry in her presence. The words of those who knew her echoed through the corridors of time, painting a portrait of a woman who defied societal norms and held a heart longer than a vast expanse of Wyoming landscape. Ella Watson's fate, sealed by a hangman's noose, forever branded her as the only woman to face such a brutal end in Wyoming. Her tragic demise, intertwined with that of Avril, became a symbol of the contempt and disregard that society held for rustlers during the tumultuous era. For decades, the myth of Cattle Kate Maxwell persisted into the latter part of the 20th century, when composer George Huffsmith embarked on a journey to unearth the truth. His research, fueled by revelations shared by Watson's own family, led to a biography that brought Ella Watson out of the shadows of distortion and into the light of truth. Through his efforts, the Cattle Kate myth began to crumble, revealing the woman behind the legend, her story etched with resilience and defiance. In 1989, a marker was erected at Ella Watson's gravesite by her devoted relatives, a solemn tribute to honor her memory and acknowledge the injustice she endured. It stood as a testament to her life and a reminder to the dark chapter in Wyoming's history. Ella Watson's legacy endures a symbol of resilience and a testament to the fight against injustice. Her memory serves as a reminder that echoes of the past, however distorted, can be unraveled and unwritten, restoring the truth and honoring the lives that history has sought to bury.